Our webinar today is how to make connections to Christian unity and interreligious relationships or interfaith relations. So I'm great. I will introduce our presenters today. During the month of November, we're continuing our um, our focus on our webinars about a familiar passage of Scripture, Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in this era of social distancing, where we can really embrace healthy government affirmed reasons for not connecting with one another and staying away from our neighbor, how does the Good Samaritan parable influence us today? Who is our neighbor? If they don't look like me, if they don't act like me, if they don't vote like me, or not in my circle of friends, or not in my denomination, well, who are they? How can I be a neighbor and follow Jesus' words to go and do likewise? One of the things that we learn from the parable is that the Samaritan took action, but he didn't do it by himself. So today is we will continue our fourth quarter webinar series with some timely information and provide some resources that might help you engage in partnerships and interfaith dialogue in your congregation, in your community. First, to get started, we want to recognize our veterans today on Veterans Day. We want to thank you and honor you for your service. Give a shout out to our veterans across all the branches of the military. And as we get started today, I want to quote from John Wesley, who said, "Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, for as long as you ever can." And with that, I'd want to invite you to our webinar today. I'm going to share my screen, and we have some wonderful presenters. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. There you go. So it's how to make connections to Christian unity and interfaith relations. And so we have a committee that's been working very hard on this for the past 20, 30 days. I have Reverend Akiko Miyake Stoner, Rebecca Godwin, Alan Jones, and Tara Macy, who will be joining us, and they'll be presenting some things. I'll be going over, we'll keep the slideshow running, and I'm going to be running some of the slides from the background. But let's welcome Kiko, who's the chair of the conference committee. And so we're glad to have everyone. I'd invite you, if there are questions, put your questions in the Q&A and also in the chat. I'll be looking at the questions as they come up. We'll have a time for questions and answers toward the end. And we'll see how much time we need for open mic at 5 o'clock. Well, we normally have an open mic time from 5 to 5:30 where you can ask directly and bring, if you want to be video present, you can be video present during that time. So join us for this wonderful time. Akiko, welcome, and thank you for being a part of this webinar today.
Oh, well, thank you, Reggie, and thank you everyone for joining today. It's really good to be connected. So I thought I'd start off with just a little intro of who and what CUIR is. CUIR stands for the Committee on Christian Unity and Interreligious Relationships. Our conference committee is made up of 3 lay and 9 clergy who are committed to our mission. First, to educate and encourage through sharing of stories, resources, and workshops. And secondly, to cajole and bamboozle, to give people the self-confidence and realize the benefits and richness that comes from building ecumenical and interreligious relationships, and to remind folks that this ministry is fun. So especially in this time of pandemic, we need more fun. We need more connection. So this time of pandemic, both of COVID and systemic racism, reminds us how important it is to build and strengthen relationships. Building relationship has looked a little different for us these days, but CUIR is excited by the possibilities to connect and build bridges through online platforms in this time of COVID. So we just wanted to share some of our ideas and get the juices flowing for you, our dear annual conference. You may have seen in our paperwork for annual conference, our resolution, and we propose these practical tips and ideas for connecting with our ecumenical and interfaith neighbors. One, an online community interfaith Thanksgiving service where representatives of multiple faith traditions are invited to participate and share their personal expressions of Thanksgiving. An invitation to members of other churches and faith traditions to join in a one-time seminar on racial justice or social healing in the face of COVID-19. An online Bible study with a small group of people from different churches of different denominational, theological, or ethnic backgrounds. Inviting an imam, a rabbi, or Buddhist, Jain, Hindu leader, or clergy of other denominations or other ethnic groups to lead a video prayer for online worship. Instead of a sermon, you might think about interviewing a representative of another faith tradition on a shared subject, maybe like prayer, as part of a recorded worship experience. You might ask for folks to share music videos from a congregation different culturally and maybe theologically from your own. Think about planning an educational series of weekly gatherings during Lent to share differing religious and social experiences. An online interfaith or ecumenical gathering, such as a Children of Abraham seminar, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians explore shared dimensions of their faith traditions. And last but not least, think about organizing a training workshop with other ecumenical and interfaith leaders to develop an action strategy to engage the issues of religious bigotry and prejudice on the issues raised by the Black Lives Matter movement. So the purpose of our webinar today is to inspire you. We propose that at least one of these activities or an activity similar be done by each of our annual conference agencies and congregations. We encourage all members of our annual conference to pray for people of other denominations and different religions and be proactive in responding to the evils of religious bigotry and hate crimes. And in the midst of all that is going on, we call upon you, friends, to cultivate joy and wonder in this difficult time by pursuing peace in this sort of relationship building. And so I'm so delighted that this afternoon, 3 members of our CUIR will be sharing a bit about how they're putting flesh onto some of these ideas and using them to strengthen both the body of Christ and their relationships with interfaith siblings. We hope that you will join us in our efforts to build a relationship with our ecumenical and interfaith neighbors. We also hope you are inspired to be bridge builders and peacemakers in your corner of the conference. So with that, on behalf of CUIR, welcome and thank you so much for participating today. I'd like to invite Tara to share a little bit what's going on in Shasta.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Tara Macy, and I'm the pastor at Community United Methodist Church in Shasta Lake, which is a tiny community north of Redding. And I'm also a member of the local interfaith organization, which is called Shasta Interfaith. So I wanted to start to talk today first about talking about the foundation of interfaith work, which is relationship building. And this likely comes as zero surprise to you. We know that relationship building is the core of everything. But when I think about interfaith work and I think about when it is new to us, it can seem really overwhelming to reach out, to bridge beyond what we're comfortable with. And so it's helpful to remember we're just establishing relationships. So whether you seek an existing group to connect with, or maybe you have a desire to create your own, an attitude of genuine curiosity, respect, and humility will be particularly helpful in this endeavor. So I'm going to share with you my best example. You can see the picture here of how a personal relationship helped open the door to interfaith work in my own community. So years ago, I went on a retreat to a Buddhist monastery in Mount Shasta. And when I began to attend the Shasta Interfaith meetings, which is a monthly meeting here, I was totally delighted to learn that the monastery Mount Shasta had opened a priory in Redding. Now, in true interfaith fashion, they are renting the parsonage from the Redding Methodist Church. So the priory is basically behind the Methodist Church. And so when Reverend Helen came to our interfaith meetings, I knew immediately I wanted to get to know her because I already had an affection and appreciation for the work of the monastery. And so it was a natural fit, and it was an easy outreach. And so through our interactions during our lunchtime meetings, we would chat a little bit, and eventually that worked into her inviting me to join them for meditation and to come for a cup of tea and conversation. And that led to the event you see before you, which was a workshop at my church for teaching about meditation. And so she spent an hour and a half, 2 different times with people from my congregation and from the community, learning about what meditation is and their particular style of it. And the other thing about relationships is that the people from my congregation who came because they had a relationship with me. And so they trusted me to bring someone to them that was going to be safe and respectful of our faith while sharing their faith. And it was understood that we would be respectful of her faith. And it was a beautiful time. It was a mutually beneficial activity. And there were relationships formed between people that attended and between them and Reverend Helen that continue. So that it was really lovely. I think for me, someone who's kind of introverted, a little bit shy, a little bit cautious at new things, it was really helpful to start by exploring an interfaith relationship that I already had an interest in, or I already knew something about, or was comfortable with. And so if it's totally new to you, I would recommend considering that as an avenue. Start with what feels comfortable. Start with something you're truly interested in, and then maybe branch out into the ones that challenge you more. But I personally wouldn't jump into interfaith work by choosing a faith that was really challenging for me to understand first. I would want something a little bit easier so we have a positive experience out of the gate. But that's just me, but that's a suggestion. So I mentioned the relationship came out of my involvement in Shasta Interfaith. And this organization has been meeting since the early 90s. And I've been involved in it for about 3.5 years. Here you can see their mission statement and vision statement that came from their website. And what I truly appreciate is that it's interfaith. Just a reminder that ecumenical refers to things that are generally different denominations of the same Christian background, whereas interfaith is different religions. So in our group, we have Muslim, Sikh, Native American, Catholic, Methodist, LDS, Unity, Judaism, Baha'i, Quakers, and others that come together. And we're currently working on creating a more active website. And one of the features that we have is a calendar that shows the different holidays or holy days that our faiths have submitted. And so you can see that here, I think. And so one of the things that you could do is also learn about a specific holiday. That could be a natural way to start a conversation with people about their faith. And then finally, one of the primary functions of our interfaith group is to put on the Interfaith Thanksgiving service. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about what that looks like while you, there's the calendar, and you can find that on their website. And then we also have some images from our interfaith service. So one of my friends at the interfaith group, the LDS representative, jokes that we always focus our theme on gratitude for our Thanksgiving service, because that is something we can all agree on. And so I remember my first time attending the Interfaith Thanksgiving service and being completely stunned that here in Redding, a predominantly conservative white county, we had this wonderful gathering that was very diverse, and we were celebrating the diversity. We were appreciating and cherishing and supporting that. And it's a fairly simple service. Each person representing a faith tradition from our group offers some sort of practice of Thanksgiving. It's about 3 minutes, that's your limit. And sometimes people read scripture, some sing, some pray. Our Quaker friends always do a top 10 things that they're thankful for. Our local imam sings the call to prayer. And then the Sikh Center offers a chant. And I think eventually you'll see some of these pictures. And typically when we're not in a pandemic, there's also an interfaith choir so that anyone can join in. And there's a small committee of people who read through the text of the songs first, so that we make sure that they're acceptable to all faiths. So that's always, they're pretty non-specific regarding the mention of divine. And then as a whole congregation, the tradition has been to end with singing "Let There Be Peace on Earth," which is usually a little bit humorous because every church sings a slightly different version of that. But it's a beautiful time. And then we usually take an offering during this service, and the offering goes to one of the local nonprofits. Oftentimes it's a food bank or a group that works with homelessness or something like that. So we had suggested that a Thanksgiving service may be one way that you could do interfaith work. And I think you could do it online. That this year we're going to be live streaming it on Facebook. And I invite all of you to join us. It will also be recorded and available on YouTube later. And that might be something that you could do in your area, either ecumenically or interfaith. And that may even lead you to the creation of an interfaith group if one doesn't exist, to build around the idea of an event. So that's just a couple of ways I've experienced interfaith work, and it's been really, really rewarding for me. So now I'm going to invite you to listen to Alan talk about his experiences.
Okay, Tara, you've been wonderful. That you've covered a lot of territory, and I'm deeply appreciative of what you've had to share. I would endorse the relationships idea, because this is all about building connections. I'd also say that it's all about maturity and integrity in a life of faith. I think when we isolate ourselves from other faith traditions, we deny ourselves some extraordinary means of grace. And for me, it's been a lifelong commitment and a calling to explore and engage with other religious traditions. And I used to teach Buddhist Christian dialogue, and the word dialogue, it has a technical meaning, and it means that you're going to actually have a conversation with somebody where you go into the conversation assuming that you may have to change. And I know that's dangerous for a lot of Christians, but to me, it's the only way to operate. I'd also say, don't diminish the power of your interfaith connecting, your presence at an event or a place at a certain time. Go to prayers at the mosque, go to Friday evening at the synagogue, go and join in. I've been aware, and this isn't to draw attention to myself, but for 2 years, the Muslim community in California holds an interfaith Seder at the Capitol building, where they invite all the legislators from the Senate and the Assembly, and it's always really well attended by the politicians. For 2 years in a row, I believe I was the only Christian pastor present at the event, which tells me that people are not making the effort to make those connections, because people in the Muslim community feel bad if they don't invite me to something. And I really like that. It's good. So the things that I'm designated to talk about, right before the COVID pandemic hit, I was in conversation with Pastor Gail Jack, who is a pastor in an African Methodist Episcopal Zion congregation here in Sacramento. And I realized that philosophically we were sort of in a similar place. And so I suggested to her and asked of her, could we have some kind of dialogue going between her congregation and the St. Mark's congregation where I'm pastor? Incidentally, Pastor Gail Jack was supposed to be with us this afternoon, and she texted me earlier this afternoon to say that she had an emergency with a very elderly aunt that she had to go and care for. So I'm really missing her presence here, because she's a great pastor and human being. So what happened was the group that we had been planning couldn't meet because of the pandemic. So we decided to go on Zoom and have 10 people from her congregation and 10 people from St. Mark's to meet once a week for a series, I think, of 8 initially, 8 meetings. And we decided on a shared set of scriptures and shared themes for preaching each Sunday. And then we exchanged recordings of our worship services with each other. And it has just been a thundering success, as far as I'm concerned. It's been really wonderful, because it's very clear to me that every congregation operates in a bubble. Every congregation has its own world that it creates. And to enter into a close relationship with another congregation where things are very different is a very healing exercise. And especially in the pandemic, because the AME Zion congregation, we only had a couple of people touched by COVID in the St. Mark's congregation, whereas there were multiple people at St. Stephen's. And we were able to share the burden of that a little with them and to pray with them. And it's been a really powerful, wonderful experience. We got to the end of that sermon series, and I told Pastor Gail that I was planning to do a series on the spirituality of Negro spirituals over the summer. And she was just so jazzed about that. So we decided to jump in together on that. And now we're in another series where we're doing actually separate worship services. But we've been pulling out themes from those worship services for conversations. We've gone now to twice a month from once a week. But I think it's just a wonderful thing. Oh, and I want to say about Zoom. I'm a Zoom heretic. I'm a Zoom enthusiast. I think Zoom is terrific. I think we're developing better relationships in many places than we do when we meet in person. There's more depth in a lot of the conversations. And certainly I would say that the group meeting with St. Stephen's would have been much more superficial if we'd been meeting in person than I've experienced it on Zoom. So I think, yeah, you do get Zoom fatigue. I know all the negatives about Zoom, and then you have somebody who's saying, I can't see anybody, or I can't, and it gets crazy, but we'll get there. We're on our way. Also, early in the pandemic, I was contacted by a rabbi from a conservative synagogue nearby who suggested that we might do a couple of webinars together. And so we did. One of them was with the Director of Health Services for the county. And Sacramento County pretty quickly was in deep water with COVID. So it was really good. And we got one medical researcher from the synagogue and one medical researcher from St. Mark's, who talked about the nature of COVID and how it worked and all of that. It was really terrific. So we decided to do another one, and we roped in the mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg, and got him to talk about some things that we wanted him to talk about, and then got him to actually take questions from everybody in both congregations. It was very cool, and I would commend that. Again, you see how people in a different bubble are engaging the same reality that your congregation is engaging. The third thing I wanted to talk about was actual worship services. And again, it's sort of awkward talking about these things, sounding as though you're sort of bragging or something. But right from the beginning, maybe I was just lazy. I decided to ask all sorts of other people to do the prayers for my worship service. So since March, I think maybe I've done the actual pastoral prayer in the service maybe 3 times. Every other time, I've had somebody from another denomination. I had all the pastors from my circuit do it. I had Akiko Mayaki Stoner do it. Becky Goodwin is doing it this coming Sunday. And I've had a rabbi, and I have plans for the imam to do. Rabbis and imams love to pray, you know, and it works. And they get it about Christian people, and they can do it really well. The other thing I've been doing a series starting in September on, I've forgotten the exact title, I should have written it down, but it's what's going to happen after 2020? How are things going to change for us? How do we see that the church's ministry and witness is going to be different? So I've been finding people all over the place to record videos. I got Jeffrey Kwan to talk about how our understanding of the Bible will be different, for example. I had a guy last week, 2 weeks ago, it was Mike McCurry, who was the press secretary in the Clinton White House, who's now a professor at Wesley Seminary, and he was talking about politics the week of the election. This last week, I had a guy from Switzerland who's actually a South African, married to a Swiss pastor. He's a layperson, and he's on the Social Justice Committee for the conference that's Switzerland, France, and North Africa. And he was talking about how global realities of the church or the mission of the church are changing as a result of COVID. He was absolutely terrific. So going and finding people from other faith traditions, other Christian churches, and inviting them to do 4 minutes, you know, nothing elaborate, no long sermon, just some ideas. I just think Zoom is our friend, and it's going to enable us to bring people of other faith traditions and other Christian traditions into the homes of our members in a way that wasn't possible before. So I think it's a great opportunity, and we need to grasp it with both hands. With all that said, I hand over now to my friend, Becky Goodwin.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my special honor today to tell you about Interfaith Nevada County. We have a slide up right now that shows you the main groups that participate in Interfaith Nevada County, affectionately known as by its acronym INC, INC. So my specific topic this afternoon is to talk to you about how interfaith work can go into the public square. So how does interfaith work come out into the public and have something to say about what's going on in the world? So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. Although I also affirm what Tara and Alan have told you about worship and relationships. It's the same thing. Relationships are definitely the key. So here are the main groups that participate in Interfaith Nevada County. If we could just take that slide down, I'd just like to talk to you all for a minute before we go to some photographs and things. I was a member of Interfaith Nevada County for my 4 years appointed to Grass Valley United Methodist Church. But I've always loved interfaith work. In all my 26 years of ministry and 4 appointments, I've always been drawn to interfaith activities and organizations, and sometimes I instigated them if they weren't happening already. So it's been my passion in ministry to do interfaith work. Now I'm talking to you from retirement land. I did retire July 1st, but the new pastor, Kathy Love at Grass Valley United Methodist Church, is also going to be involved with INC, Interfaith Nevada County. And in a few minutes, I'll tell you about something that she and I did together in June during our transition. More about that in a moment. But I wanted to tell you what we do at the monthly meetings. First of all, we take turns hosting it so that we see each other's interesting faith community places and fellowship halls and places of prayer. It's very beautiful to see the diversity. And whoever is the host of that day will offer an opening devotion, and they're free to do that in their own faith tradition or in an interfaith manner. They choose how to do that. The next thing we do is share mutual caring for each other by checking in. Everyone talks for a couple of minutes about what's going on in their heart, in their congregation, anything that they wish to share, and we care for each other in that way. The next thing we do is called an odyssey. We hear one person tell us about their spiritual journey, their pilgrimage of faith. And so we call that an odyssey, and the person who is sharing is called the Odyssean for the month. It's a lot of fun and so insightful to hear people of different faiths talk about how they came to claim that faith or reclaim it or renew it and become, committed. It's wonderful to hear. And then the other thing we did at those meetings is plan public events. So now let's go to the first photo. So Reggie, if you can share with us my first photograph. Here it comes. Here we have Interfaith Nevada County at the end of an interfaith march for peace and justice. This was in September 2019. Now, of course, now in the pandemic, such things are not very easy to do. So they are doing virtual types of programs, but you can see this beautiful live version from last September 2019. They're on track, hopefully April of 2021. They're going to try and see if they can do live marches again. The interfaithmarch.com is actually an organization. It's a network of peace marches. And so we were part of an international movement of similar marches. Any of you could create a march like this, but it's kind of cool to be involved with Interfaith March for Peace and Justice. And you can see a large banner on the side of your screen that has a dove on it. That is the official logo of interfaithmarch.com. A great organization to connect with. I would have you also notice the spirit of all the signs here. The signs are all very uplifting and positive. This is not a protest march. There are times and places for protest, of course, And we do them in Interfaith Nevada County. But this is not a march to protest anything, but to proclaim all that is good. And so this is just half of the marchers and the pictures and the posters that they made. And you can see a nice diversity of people here. Let's go to the second photo. Here you see a group of the happy marchers walking through Grass Valley that day. You see smiles, you see joy, because it was a lot of fun. It was a fun event. Of course, there was a celebration at the end with food and fun. And hopefully in the future, they'll get back to that. But this September, there was not an interfaith march live like this. Meanwhile, there are ways to give public witness during the pandemic. So let's go to the next photo. I'll just let you take that in. Here we see an interfaith kneel in. Following the death of George Floyd, to witness to the value of human life, we decided to take a knee together for George Floyd and for many others that have died at the hands of violence in incidents with police. So here we are, we planned this. We gathered at a plaza in Nevada City. We kept 6 feet apart, and of course we wore our masks. You can see me there in the white robe and the stole in the back. And I was holding a picture of George Floyd. And if you look over to your left, you'll see Kathy Love, the new pastor at Grass Valley United Methodist Church. She's wearing a short-sleeved shirt, and she's got her hands up close to her face there in prayer. We took a knee for 8 minutes, 49 seconds, total silence. And then at the end of that, we stood up quietly and dispersed, keeping our spacing 6 feet apart. So you can see interfaith work, even during a pandemic, can be very valuable. This one is poignantly serious. It's quite a moment. It's making me feel teary right now, just remembering. But we had a very good response from the public. People going by would stop and be quiet with us. It was very, very serious. So let's go ahead and take that picture. Keep it in your mind, but let's take it off the screen and just let me talk to you. Interfaith work in the public square can be very joyous and lots of fun, like the Interfaith March that I showed you pictures of. And it can also be very serious and deeply, deeply urgent, as it was when we took a knee. I think now more than ever, in the midst of this pandemic and anxiety and worries near and far, I think people of different faiths have a great opportunity right now. We can demonstrate together in both ways, in joyful ways and in serious, urgent ways. We can show our concern for what is not right in our world, and we can also show our hope in all that is good. We can do all that. And I think now more than ever, the world needs interfaith witness to offer hope and healing. Amen.
Well, thank you so much, Becky and Tara and Alan. I'm feeling moved and inspired myself. There are so many beautiful things that are happening that are connecting people in these trying times, even though it seems sometimes that the division and the pain are more talked about. And so, my friends, let us cultivate more unity. We'd love to hear what you're doing. So the CCUIR would encourage and kindly request you to share your reflections and photos with Selby and Tua for the conference's Instant Connection. And we encourage you to share what you're doing ecumenically and interreligiously on other social media platforms as well. It is our hope that we can just continue to encourage and inspire others, create a movement and momentum around this really important ministry and work. So just by way of wrap up today, we want to share our newly updated, ever improving CUIR website with you. Thank you, Reggie. So we've been working hard to cultivate resources. I wonder, might we be able to share the website? If not, that's okay. So if you go to cumc.org/CUIR resources, we've been working hard to create a list of different ecumenical and interreligious. Oh, there we go. So could you please click on ecumenical and interfaith resources? Thank you, Reggie. So yes, we've got different subheadings here, and so you can click on those and then find different resources. We know that this is a working list, and so I would encourage you to share any resources that you found helpful and inspiring with me, and then we'll just keep creating a larger and larger database. Just want to highlight the Interfaith Thanksgiving Service resources. Tara shared about the power of interfaith Thanksgiving. So this might be a place to start thinking about how you might engage your community with an interfaith Thanksgiving service for next year. And then just a little invitation. Our CUIR is part of the North State Ecumenical Conference. And this is an organization, a body that puts together a Week of Christian Unity event every year. And so this year it's going to be virtual, like many things are, and you're invited to join in their virtual choir. So these will be voices from many different denominations in our areas. So please email Keenan, Keanan, at firstumcsac.org. I can put it in the chat too. If you would be interested in participating and lending your voice to this ecumenical effort. I think with that, I'll turn it back to Reggie. Thanks so much.
I am here. So thank you. I was inspired so much, not only working with everyone, but learning so much more about the work that is going on with the committee. So I am grateful and thankful for the work. Please check out the website. Please make sure that you check out the resources that are available on the website. We're going to have this PowerPoint presentation available. It has live links in it for you, so you'll be able to check that out also. I wanted to see if you had some questions that for our panelists. If you can put some of those questions in the chat or possibly in the Q&A, I can bring them up if you have some questions that you might have for our panelists. One of the things I know Kiko asked in the beginning, and I know there was a survey done before I got here, what are some ways that you are involved in those that are attending the webinar? What are some ways that you are involved in this wonderful Christian unity and interreligious relationships work? Why don't you put that in the chat? Let's hear about some other things that people are doing, possibly. Some ways that you think you can get involved. That would be helpful. I'm sure it'd be helpful for them to know also, to hear about some things that are going on. What are some ways that you are involved? I see we go in small groups to find interreligious uh, 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 interreligious work and in groups. Um, I'll ask the panelists, what are some recommendations for those that are in uh, um, uh, rural communities and also some that are in urban areas where there might be a lot and people could be overwhelmed by the number of interreligious groups? What are some ways you can talk to us about that work in not only small rural communities where there might not be a proliferation of interreligious communities, or in urban areas where there's a lot?
I could speak to that. Can I do that, Reggie?
Sure, absolutely.
So in a small community, you can be surprised at how much diversity there is. Tara referred to being surprised how much diverse spiritual and religious traditions were up in that area. But I also have found the same thing, it's surprisingly. But when you're in a small community and you don't find that diversity, start with whoever you have.
Right.
When I was in Colfax a million years ago, 26 years ago, I didn't find much except Christians around. So we instigated an ecumenical Thanksgiving service, and it was all Christians, but that's mainly what was in the Colfax area. That may have changed by now because it's been a while since I was there. But you start with who you have and build from there.
Good, good. Some other ideas or thoughts?
Well, I think in our time of Zoom, particularly, it's a little bit maybe easier. So if you could find an interfaith group in an area nearby or even far away, perhaps they would engage in conversation with you, and you might be able to meet someone to have an online study with, or something like that. There are certainly some very rural areas up here in Shasta County. So I would encourage some of my friends that are further out than I am to even join our group, because we're not exclusive to a particular area. So you may even find other groups that would be willing to bring you into their circle.
Okay. I see a couple. John says many interfaith community organizations and groups they work with, a lot of them, and also faith groups working with non-faith groups. It's been helpful. A question for Alan. Does the public have access to some of your Zoom projects?
Well, the answer to that is varies. Obviously, the conversations with St. Stephen AME Zion is sort of a closed group because it's very personal, and it's yeah, we don't want to expand the group, and especially beyond the two congregations. The two webinars we had with the other synagogue, anybody, if they heard about it, could have joined that. And our worship services, as with many other people, are all up on YouTube. So I just want to re-emphasize something, and I may be speaking to myself more than I'm speaking to anybody on the call, but I have to keep reminding myself that geography doesn't matter anymore. You know, I can just as easily have a connection with a synagogue in Kuala Lumpur as I can with the one that's around the corner. And I know we often don't know people there, but there are ways to make connections with other people in other parts of the world and in other cities, other states. And I mean, you may be in a small town in the Central Valley. As long as you've got decent internet, you can connect with anybody anywhere in the world.
Florin, United Methodist Church in Sac participates in the Food Closet worship services, South Sacramento Interfaith Partnership, and the Catholic-run Loaves and Fishes Ministry that serves the community of those without homes. So there are different spaces that people can enter into to connect. A question came up, have you ever had challenges in interfaith or ecumenical groups where one, someone keeps trying to evangelize and convert a person of another faith to Christianity, or two, a ministerial association that would not welcome women clergy? What are your recommendations for how clergy could respond in these kinds of conflict situations? And those are two good ones. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I hope some of my colleagues will offer something too. I've experienced all of that in all my appointments. Even Christian unity can be hard to build. When I was part of a Thanksgiving service in Colfax, one of the denominations backed out because it wasn't going to be Jesus enough. It was going to be Thanksgiving, gratitude, American hymns. It wasn't going to be all about Jesus. So they actually left the planning process and they would no longer participate. And I tried to be friends with that pastor after that, and he wasn't very interested in being friends. But I tried anyway. Say, hey, we missed you. I've also experienced in Grass Valley. You might have noticed on the Interfaith Nevada County, Peace Lutheran and the United Methodists and the Latter-day Saints would be the only what you call Christian groups. All the rest of the groups were different. I don't like to use generalizations, but some of the Christian denominations will not participate in interfaith work. They don't feel called to it. They don't appreciate interfaith work. They don't legitimize other religions. It's a little sad to me that happens. There's a lot of worry about this. And I went to the Parliament of the World Religions in Toronto, Canada, a couple of years ago, and they had a whole seminar about this. This is a huge challenge to get all Christians interested in interfaith work. But again, you start with who you have. In Grass Valley, the Lutherans and the Methodists, Latter-day Saints call themselves Christians. I just have to say they've been very generous and involved. So you take the Christians who will participate, and you may have to struggle really hard to build relationships with the others. There's a ministerial association in Grass Valley that I went to one time, and I was very uncomfortable there. They clearly did not appreciate a woman showing up. So it was really awkward. So I put my energy into Interfaith Nevada County and, just try to maintain friendly, loving. You can sometimes get Christians of all denominations to at least cooperate on charity.
Yeah.
They will cooperate on food ministry and homelessness and those kind of things. So that's what I can offer. If somebody else wants to offer.
Anyone else has, yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I've noticed in our area a very similar phenomenon. The mainline Protestants, as well as the Catholic LDS Quakers, they're involved in interfaith, but we never have participation from the more evangelical side of things. And unless when COVID hit and on our website we began listing the churches and their online services, they took us up on that, the free advertising. So that was a step. That was more participation than we've had. And they're always invited, but they typically haven't shown up. The other thing that we do with our interfaith service is that we make sure that during each individual's presentation, no one is supposed to offer an advertisement for their church or their faith's other services. And so we try to hold that really carefully, that we're not trying to recruit people. And then there's just kind of an agreement within, and the purpose of the committee is to appreciate diversity and support diversity. So that doesn't happen within it. It's interesting that in our book of discipline, there are statements about Methodists valuing interfaith work. I don't know that you would find that in some of the other denominational documents. So that's kind of an interesting thing that the Methodists have.
And that's a segue for me to say just two quick things. One is that I've encountered those kind of prejudices within the United Methodist Church in various places. And so it's not limited to other denominations or other religions. And the other thing I would say is what I said about dialogue. Whenever you're entering into a relationship that's honest with somebody who's different from you, you have to be ready to change. And some people have a faith that's so fixed that it cannot change. And that's, to me, just not real.
Yeah. Well, that brings up another question. How have you dealt with the interplay both in the Christian space and in the interreligious space between conservative and progressive faith communities as you deal with things like Black Lives Matter or for other issues that come up? So you have how do you work those things through, even within Christendom, but also outside of Christendom? You have different levels of conservative or progressive folk who have different views on things. How do you deal with that? Thoughts, questions, ideas?
Well,
I heard one of the things that said when you enter into a space, you start by listening. Right. So I heard
Akiko should speak on this.
Yes, go, Akiko. Well, yeah.
I mean, I could just offer kind of the philosophy of our Interfaith Alliance chapter here in Central California, and really the emphasis is on civility in schools and making sure all students are, allowed to, or like not one religion is pushed on students in our more conservative school districts and classrooms. And so I think to answer that question from that kind of perspective is that we just try and find our commonalities, because we realize that there is a huge breadth of different understandings of whatever different issue. And so we try to come together on what we can work on, and then in working on these issues, we find common ground, and we can have those conversations about other issues and continue to build relationship, build trust, so that we can perhaps grow and dialogue, like Alan says, opening ourselves to be changed. Yes. Perhaps.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I found it surprising that the things that we might consider a social justice issue, other people don't consider that a social justice issue. It's a political issue for them. So I've learned that even something like a topic like homelessness, you might not find common ground as far as how the interfaith group wants to respond. So it can be really challenging to have that public presence, like Becky talked about, because there is such a vast difference of opinions on that. So, but like Akiko says, you start where you are and find those commonalities and then branch out.
Right. Well, thank you for this wonderful time together. Some people, I see some in the chat about how Marin Interfaith Council is very active and works on bringing together people together, staying, and they're doing something at 5:30 this evening entitled "Staying Resilient in Trying Times." So the Interfaith Council in Marin is doing something, trying to, get at some of those things that you talked about. Well, I appreciate everybody coming on today for the webinar. We normally stay a little bit past 5 to see if there are any questions that you want to ask directly, and we will. We'll see how long that takes if there are any questions that come up. Again, let's give our panelists, our presenters, a wonderful hand for the wonderful work that the committee has been doing. It takes all of us to do this work, and we appreciate the work and the energy and the time that you put in. So thank you. Next week, we're going to have a webinar, Decriminalization of Children and Youth. So please join us for that webinar. Look for the registration for the webinar in the Instant Connection coming up tomorrow. And then we're going to send out another blast so that you can sign up for this wonderful webinar next week. So we're going to hang on. We're going to have open mic for those that want for a couple of minutes, possibly till 5:15. I know some have to go, but we want to thank you, and we're going to open up the mics in a little bit, okay? So thank you. We'll see you in open mics, and you can ask some questions direct. All right. Well, thank you, guys. Let's see if you have some questions, why don't you just raise your hand and we can identify you. And at that moment, I see a hand raised, and then we can, Jonathan, allow to talk, and then you can, I'm going to see, too, I might need help with you bringing them video-wise if they want to. But Johnson Reynolds, you are on. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Yes, Johnson Reynolds. Yes, I'm in First United Methodist Church in San Rafael. And we had a church that has become a Fijian church basically there. And we pushed out the more progressive members there. It's a leadership style that's happening there. And I don't know how we address that in the annual conference, but that's the issue about conservative and progressive perspectives. And not all people in the Fijian community are conservative necessarily. And there's a variety of people in every group, we know. But there's a problem with that. We had 2 ways of moving in the annual conference. It's the multicultural church, but the ethnic church to grow churches. And it sounds like we were a progressive church, a social justice church, at least and verbally. But now we've become a church that's mostly populated with persons from the Fijian community, but also a leadership style that's not responsive to those people in the Caucasian and social justice oriented people. So I'm just, I don't know whether you want to respond to that, but.
Well, I think you're bringing up possibly a good question. I think we talked about that. How do you engage when people are coming in who are different, whether there's leadership style because of ethnic, cultural spaces or styles due to a slant on progressive or conservative. But any more input on that from the committee? I mean, because this is real in the interreligious space and even in the Christian unity space. How do you?
My sense is that this is a topic for another webinar. When we're talking about communities in transition and congregations in transition, I think it's a different set of dynamics from when we're talking about ecumenical and interfaith relations.
Got it.
John knows that I was pastor there for a year at San Rafael, so I'm familiar with the situation. And it really is tough when transition's happening like that. And there are no easy answers, I don't think.
Right. Some other questions that you might have. If you want to raise your hand, we can identify you and then bring you in. So if you have some questions that might come up from the conversations. Yeah, just raise your hand. And I'm looking, trying to see if anyone has any questions. What was the funniest experience that you've had in these spaces? Any humorous, thank you, JB. Any humorous experiences that you've had in entering these spaces that you looked at it afterwards and you go, oh, this is, yeah.
I could say there's just a lot of joy and a lot of laughter, especially when you're doing a positive thing like the Interfaith March that I showed you pictures of. There can be a lot of fun, but I can't think of a specifically funny thing right now, but definitely a lot of joy and laughter. Children running around, you know, just a lot of joy.
I saw it in the march that there's a sense of connectedness and a joy. Have you found that in the work, a deeper sense of connection, not only in your own spiritual life, your deeper connection with God, but a deeper connection in the community? Have you found that to be true? No, yes, maybe.
Maybe. Well, I think it's, for me, it's opened my social world up to, I mean, all of these wonderful clergy people I wouldn't have necessarily met so easily, for sure, or so many at once, having been part of that interfaith group. So that, yeah, it's definitely increased my awareness of our local congregations. And that certainly gives me a different viewpoint when I look out at my community, particularly during certain times of year when maybe one perspective raises up stronger than others. And then to see, well, there are other viewpoints among us. So it's a nice reminding that it's not as one-sided as maybe it seems sometimes.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I'd say on that is there are two, but probably many more different kinds of interfaith clustering. One is to do with people getting to know each other and to deepen the relationships and the connections between the groups. And the other is to provide a civic presence. I was very involved with the San Francisco Interfaith Council for a long time and was president of it for a while. And there were 3 times while I was president that the Archbishop called me and asked that we organize an interfaith event to commemorate some particular happening, major happening in the life of the community, like when the war started in Iraq, that you want to bring the whole community together and to pray. Yeah. And I was also involved in creating an outfit called Civic that's in Santa Clara County, similar kind of program that it wanted to make sure that the Board of Supervisors and the various city councils had a go-to place where, when things were happening, the religious community could be identified and brought together. And I like groups that do both of those things. I think there's a danger in just having interfaith groups that are navel-gazing and being nice to each other. But I think there's power in being connected. Here in Sacramento, the Interfaith Council is basically the inward-looking kind of group. Don't tell them I said so. But the local community organizing group, the PICO group, is called Sacramento ACT, and it has the most effective interfaith community, both clergy and lay involvement. that leads me to say one more thing, and then I'll try and shut up. And that is, I've always felt it was really important not to just have clergy being the people connecting, not just having the leaders from the communities, but to get people in the pew involved and doing things in relating with other people in other kinds of pews or whatever they have in their tradition.
Right. Any final thoughts? I see maybe the final thought is, again, how have you been changed? JB Gray Finley is asking that question. How have you been changed by being involved in this way? So maybe that'll be our final thoughts. Maybe, yeah, let's go through each panelist. How have you changed by being involved? I'll start with Becky. Becky, how have you changed?
I would say I've been enlivened and renewed in my own Christian faith, and at the same time, very warmed by the love of God I experience in people of other traditions. And I actually miss those people very much since I've retired and left that area. I miss them a lot. And the pandemic has made it bittersweet having to leave them. These are truly people I want to be friends with for the rest of my life, while I also look for interfaith friends here in Sacramento where I am now. So renewal of my own faith and really great friendships with other people.
Good. Tara, how about yourself?
I think that there is a level of excitement that comes to me when I get to learn about others, and sometimes the humdrum of the day-to-day can make you feel a little bit flat. So those monthly meetings of interconnecting with people that are different and that are excited about community bonding and relationship building is restorative. Sometimes it's nourishing to us, and it's also, when we talked about difficulty with inter-Christian conversation, sometimes you can feel like you're the only congregation that maybe sees certain social justice work in a particular light or something, and then you can go to these and also see, oh, these other denominations also value this. Yeah. So you don't feel like quite the oddball out in your community.
Right. I'll go with Alan, then Akiko. I'll have you do last. Alan, how have you been changed?
Enormously enriched. My Christian faith has been incredibly enriched and stretched into places I didn't know existed. And I mentioned that I taught Christian Buddhist dialogue actually at the GTU for 7 years. And that began with a friendship I had with a Buddhist monk, and I knew nothing about Buddhism. So I went into the class teaching it, not knowing about Buddhism, and making that very clear. And oh my goodness, did I stretch and grow. And I suggested that each time the class met that we had a worship time. So we would in the Buddha hall doing Buddhist things, and then we'd sing a Christian hymn, and it was just way cool. So I believe my world has been opened up in the most extraordinary and miraculous ways.
Beautiful. Kiko, final word.
Oh, final word. Well, gosh, it all boils down to relationships. My kind of I've been in Fresno for 10 years now, and my first foray into the wider community was going to a crop walk planning meeting. And I always thought crop walk was like a Christian thing, right? But here in Fresno, it's really interfaith. And so being plugged in there and then being invited into the interfaith community, it just like enriched my experience of Fresno. And I just love this place. And it's because of these beautiful interfaith relationships that I've continued to have the honor of building. And I think like prayers from other traditions just mean so much to me. They help me know God in a fresh and different way. And so I just feel so grateful for the prayers from other religious traditions. And then on a more very personal note, I was married last week, and I met my husband through our interfaith connections. He is the brother of the executive director of the Islamic Cultural Center. So when Reza got married, he invited me to his wedding where I met his brother, and now we got married. So yeah, just like interfaith.
Yeah, that's all.
What an interfaith gift.
I know.
Yeah.
Wow, that brings it home. I knew you'd be good at the last voice. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thanks again, all of you. We will be putting the PowerPoint, we'll put it in the website so you can get the live links. Don't forget to go on the website, the CUIR website, and go through our conference website to CUIR website, and then look at the resources. This will be on YouTube in a little bit with the help from Tua, so thank you. And don't forget, next week, decriminalization of children and youth. So from all of us, thank you so much. And thank you, presenters, for this wonderful, exciting time. All right. Blessings to you. Bye-bye now.